Are your portraits just a little bit soft, even when you feel like you've really nailed the focus? Well, let's talk about it. In this video today, I'm going to break down the 4 biggest reasons why your images might not be as sharp as they should be. I'll walk you through each issue using real-world examples from my recent photo shoots, including exactly what can go wrong and how to fix it. We'll talk about autofocus settings, shutter speed choices, depth of field mistakes, and how flash duration can ruin your action shots. And if you stick around to the end, I've got a bonus section on how to test your lens just in case there's a hardware issue behind your blur. Using single-shot AF can cause focus to fail when your subject moves even slightly. This mode locks the focus the moment that you have pressed the shutter or engage back button focus, or press the AF on button, which works fine if your subject is completely still, but in portrait photography, even a small shift in pose can render the subject out of focus. Then there's your own movement. Photographers are rarely standing perfectly still, and we're leaning in, adjusting our position and composition, or shifting slightly as we direct the model. All of this can move the camera just enough to throw off the focus, especially when working with shallow depth of field. So the setting you want to avoid with Canon cameras is one-shot AF. With Nikon and Sony, it's called AFS, and with Fujifilm cameras, it's called S or AFS. Instead, use continuous autofocus paired with eye detection to track your subject's eyes in real time. This combination allows the camera to constantly adjust focus as either you or your subject moves, especially when working with fast apertures or unpredictable movement. So the settings you want to use are Canon AI Servo plus eye detection AF, Nikon and Sony AFC with eye detection, Fujifilm C or AFC. With these settings, I get practically 100% of my portraits in focus. When shooting with continuous lights, many photographers make the mistake of using too slow of a shutter speed, especially when working handheld. While it might seem tempting to lower the shutter speed to capture more light, it can often result in softness, especially if there's any subtle movement in your shot. For this look with Kyle, I lit the background using 4 Nanlite PavoTube 30C LEDs. They were suspended from 2 boom arms using 4-inch zip ties, S-binders, and safety cables. The height and the angles of the tubes were adjusted by playing with the length of the safety cables. Some were looped and shortened to create a staggered, forced perspective. For the key light, I used a Nanlite Compact 200B, a large LED panel. Alternatively, you could use any soft modifier and get the job done. Be sure to check out the description for links to all the gear that I'm using, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and sign up for the bell. I initially used a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second handheld, and you can see how the image is noticeably soft. Even the smallest movements in my hands and the model's pose while shooting with continuous lights can cause blur. Instead, shoot at least 1/200th of a second and many more of your images will be sharp. For even better results, use a tripod or a camera stand like I do in the studio to fully eliminate your movements on set. Something that can easily make or break your images, especially in close-up portrait photography, is depth of field. For this look with Kyle, I used a 6-light setup to create a dramatic, high-contrast black and white portrait. The main light was modified with a grid reflector with a 20-degree grid. I added 2 lights with reflectors for crisp edge lights, and a 4th light with a grid was mounted at the end of the boom, high and behind him, in order to create a hair light. The background was lit with 2 lights pointed straight up, and then I placed an apple box on either side of them, and then placed a piece of 20 by 30 inch, or that would be 50 by 75 centimeter foam core on top of them. Then I moved them closer and closer together. Oh, there we go. I was too far away.
Oh shit, okay.
Yeah, it's like crazy that that's how this works scientifically. This created a really cool V or double searchlight pattern on the backdrop. I want to show you some close-up portraits that I shot of Kyle at f4, f8, and f13. At f4, you can see that only really his eyes are sharp. At f8, things are getting better, but at f13, you can see that all of his hair is sharp and crisp in the image. This reminds me of a mistake that I made a few years ago on a beauty shoot. I tested my lens and found that the best aperture or sharpest aperture was f5.6. So when I went out to my next session, I set my camera up and I set my aperture, you guessed it, to f5.6. But afterwards, I realized that while the image looked technically sharp, the only thing that was really in focus were the subject's eyes, and the detail in their hair was soft. So just because a lens is technically sharp at a given f-stop doesn't mean that using it at that f-stop will get you enough depth of field to get everything you need in focus. So just think about your subject first. If you need to show something like jewelry or maybe an earring or a necklace, or you need to show off an entire haircut, then you better stop down in order to get all that detail. If you're just shooting a portrait of a person for maybe their senior portrait or something, sure, you can shoot at f4. If you're shooting a business portrait, maybe shoot at f8. If you're shooting a portrait that you're going to extract and composite later and it's close up, then shooting at f11 could get you the detail that you need in their hair in order to mask it out correctly. In this full body example with Kyle, stay tuned for an upcoming fashion photography lighting tutorial where I break down this look. But in this video today, I want to show you images that I took at f2, 2.8, f4, 5.6, f8, and f11. At f2 to f5.6, only his face is sharp. But at f11, you can see that both his face and his feet are reasonably in focus. And this is going to be very important if we're doing a fashion editorial and we're trying to show off his jeans. So just think about it again. What you think might be a great f-stop because something looks bocalicious and that's cool may not be the best choice if your subject is in fact the clothing, and we need to show all of that in focus. The next reason why you run into problems with getting sharp images is possibly because of flash duration. A lot of people think that to stop motion in the studio, you need to use high-speed sync, but that couldn't be further from the truth. High-speed sync is great outdoors when you can't control the light and you want to shoot at a faster shutter speed. But indoors, where you can control the lighting, there's a better, more efficient way. At or below your camera's sync speed, which for most people is around 1/200th of a second, your flash emits a single bright pulse of light. The duration of that pulse is what we call flash duration, the actual length of time that your strobe is emitting light. High-speed sync, by contrast, turns your flash into more of a strobe light. It emits a rapid series of weaker pulses as your shutter curtain moves across the sensor. While that allows you to use faster shutter speeds, it comes at a cost, and that is a significantly dimmer flash output. That means that you'll need to raise your ISO or open up the aperture to maintain your exposure. Potentially, this will mean sacrificing image quality or losing depth of field. So what's the smarter option in the studio? The most effective way to freeze motion indoors is by manipulating the flash duration, that is, shortening the amount of time that your subject is illuminated. In a darkened studio where flash is primarily the only light source, it's not the shutter speed that freezes motion, it's the duration of the flash burst. The shorter the flash duration, the sharper your action shots will be. Many brands allow you to shorten this duration by switching to a mode called Action, Freeze, or Color Mode Off. These modes sacrifice some color consistency from minimum to maximum power, but it allows you to do so with a shorter burst of light. If you get your flash duration down to 1/3000th or faster and eliminate the impact of ambient light on your exposure, you'll be able to freeze motion, stop down for more depth of field, and keep your ISO low for maximum quality. Some lights display the flash duration right on the LCD. If you're using a system like ProPhoto, which doesn't, you'll need to check the manual. But in general, lowering the power setting shortens the flash duration on most lights. In this look with Kyle, I used two lights, both fitted with grid reflectors. The main light was placed on camera right, flagged with a V-flat and a 4x4 foot flag in order to cast a shadow across the background. The kicker was placed in the back on camera left, and I used a 30-degree grid inside to keep the light off the floor and on Kyle. This helped separate him from the dark background, and both of these lights metered at 1/200th of a second, f8 at ISO 100. I started the shoot in standard mode, which prioritizes color consistency, but gives you slower flash durations. At that setting, the flash duration was around 1/454th of a second with the main light. Even though I was shooting at 1/200th of a second, which is my sync speed, we still saw motion blur in Kyle's feet. Then I switched to action mode, which dropped the flash duration to 1/3597th of a second on the lights. I also closed the drapes and turned off the overhead lights to eliminate the ambient light, which can create ghosting even if your flash is fast enough to freeze motion on its own. If your slowest flash has a duration of 1/3000th of a second or shorter, and you still see motion blur in your subject's feet, try reducing the ambient light. You typically need at least a 3-stop difference between your flash exposure and the ambient exposure to fully eliminate this type of ghosting. Once everything was set up correctly, I took the final images. Even though my shutter speed remained consistent at 1/200th of a second, Kyle was perfectly frozen in midair. Zooming in here, you can clearly see the difference in Kyle's feet. They're blurry in standard mode on the left and sharp in action mode on the right. Now, if you've done all of these techniques and your images still aren't sharp, there might be a technical problem with your lens. Zoom lenses, particularly those that telescope, or as I like to say, lipstick, they have a tendency to get out of whack. What happens is we usually zoom in, that extends the lens, and then we sit it down on something a little too hard. Maybe we drop it, unfortunately, and then that force causes the elements to become out of alignment. And that will cause, in some instances, either the top or the bottom of your frame, depending on your orientation, to be blurry compared to the other side. So you can check them out by just photographing a piece of paper with text on it. And you just want to make sure that your lens is perfectly square to that piece of paper when you take the test shots. And you want to try different f-stops and different focal lengths in order to get a good grasp as to whether or not your image, your lens has a problem. Then you can pixel peep all around the photo and figure that out. I took this test chart and placed it on the floor, and then took my camera stand and hovered it over the top and pointed my lens straight down. And I made sure with a level that my lens was perfectly flat and level to the surface, to the floor. Then I took a series of pictures with a 24-70, focusing on the top left circle here, and you can see coming down to the bottom here that the sharpness at the bottom and the top are not the same. And this is indicative of this lens being a little bit out of whack and it needs service. So I hoped all of this helped and made sense. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. Also, if you want to take your learning to the next level, consider attending one of my in-person workshops or a one-on-one workshop, or consider joining the Academy with John Gress, my online members-only learning platform, where you will see extended format tutorials and watch me shoot and problem solve from every angle. You can see a full 1 hour and 40 or so minute video about the shoot that I did with Kyle. Plus, you can participate in 2 live monthly Q&A and critique sessions where you can interact with me directly and I can help you with your work in a small group setting. And if you want to submit images and have them critiqued anonymously with everyone sitting there, you can do that as well. So for more information and to sign up for a 3-day free trial, just go to johngress.com/academy. Also remember to like, subscribe, and sign up for the bell. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.